45, 50 minutes to come to church. But I can't complain because it's beautiful. And starting now until like, I don't know when, every week it gets better and better, you know, looking at the fall foliage, it's amazing. Okay, we are going to look at the book. Actually, I'm going to start my timer. I have a conviction to not go any longer than 30 minutes. So, let's start. We're going to look at the book of Lamentations today, everyone's favorite. Thank you for laughing. You might not be familiar with Lamentations. If you crack your Bible right in half, you'll probably land somewhere around Isaiah, and then you'll see Jeremiah, and then you'll see the small book of Lamentations. In my book, my Bible, it's about 8 pages. It's not popular.
It is today.
It is right now, and we're going to be familiar with it. Yeah, I mean, it's in the Old Testament, so maybe, you know, our current Christian community is more familiar with the New Testament, but still, you know, there are books in the Old Testament that we're super familiar with, right? This is not one of them. I would guess that there's a very large percentage of the Christian population who doesn't know much about it, probably hasn't read it, and there are probably not a small number of people who don't even know that it's in the Bible. So let's fix that. Let's talk about it. I mean, I could be preaching to the choir here. You all could be experts in it, so that's fine. But I guess, to me, the question is why? Why doesn't it get spoken of? I think if you did a search on sermons about Lamentations, you'd be hard-pressed to find one. So the question is why? So let's start with a little bit of a historical perspective as to what this book is. This has traditionally been attributed to Jeremiah. I think that's a tradition. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any truth to that. We're not exactly sure who wrote it, but it doesn't matter. What matters is the context itself, okay? This is the author looking back at the history of the people of God with reflection and mourning. Why? We know when Moses led the people out of Egypt, they wandered in the desert. They got the law, they tried to learn how to be the people of God and to be the structure that even carries on to today about what it means to be his people. After a while, they got leaders called judges, and then they were led by Samuel, we know this, and then the people said, we would really like to be like the other nations, so God, please give us a king. So God gave them Saul. We know how that went, not great. And then he rose up David. David shows up and fights Goliath. All of a sudden he gets really popular, grows in stature, becomes the king. And really, that's probably the most glorious part spiritually, even though he had his flaws, of God's people. And then his son Solomon becomes like the king of kings. Builds the temple, makes Jerusalem just like one of the wonders of the world. It's glorious. So this is like the pinnacle, like the time when God's people are just shining in the universe. And how long does this last? Does anybody know?
40 years.
1 generation. It's like, you know, they reach the climax, and then, you know, his son Rehoboam has a chance to do things, and then Jeroboam takes off, and then the nation splits, and it becomes the nation of Israel and this nation of Judah. And it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse, until eventually they're taken into exile in Babylon, and that gives birth to books like Lamentations, where the author is looking back and trying to understand what happened. How have we fallen so far? And we need to take time to think about it, and we need to mourn the heights from which we have fallen. The book has several voices. There are at least 2. When we start to read, and we'll read right now, we read what we call the narrator. He's kind of like a news reporter explaining what's happening. So let's read Lamentations 1 through 7 real quick. I'm reading the NIV. It says, "How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. She who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night. Tears are upon her cheeks. Among all of her lovers, there is none to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her. They have become her enemies. After affliction and harsh labor, Judah has gone into exile. She dwells among the nations. She finds no resting place. All who pursue her have overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to her appointed feasts. All her gateways are desolate. Her priests groan, her maidens grieve, and she is in bitter anguish. Her foes have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Her children have gone into exile, captive before the foe. All the splendor has departed from the daughter of Zion. Her princes are like deer that find no pasture. In weakness they have fled before their pursuer. In the days of her affliction and wandering, Jerusalem remembers all the treasures that were hers in the days of old, when her people fell into enemies' hands. There was no one to help her. Her enemies looked at her and laughed at her destruction. It's very important to understand a few things about Scripture when we read them. One of them is, what's the context? So we've talked a little bit about the history of it. Why is this book about mourning? It's because they're looking back at the heights they had fallen. Also understanding the type of literature that it is. The Bible is made up of not just like historical contents. It also has songs of praise. It has art. Books like this that are actually poetry. Poetry, this is ancient poetry. We use poetry when we want to express things, emotions, and feelings that words fail us, right? That's why art is so important. We want to create because we don't have the words to use to express what we want to express. And so we will write poetry or we will sing songs because it gives us the opportunity to just show what's really, really deep inside. And sometimes we'll admire those things. You know, like when you want to experience something, maybe you'll turn on a song and it'll bring you back to an emotional moment, either a high or a low. Art does that for us. That's what this poetry is doing. And you'll see this like metaphorical, allegorical speech throughout Lamentations that isn't reality. It's exaggerated because they're trying to express the deep pain and the emotion and the anguish that they feel. So the narrator goes on for a while. And then finally, the woman speaks. There's a narrator and there's a woman. The woman is Jerusalem, or Judah, or in a broader sense, God's people altogether. The narrator is talking about how far they've fallen. And then finally, she speaks. And we see what she says in a few verses. In verse 9 of chapter 1, she says, her filthiness clung to her skirts. She did not consider her future. Her fall was astounding. There was none to comfort her. She says, look, O Lord, on my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. Verse 11, all her people moan as they search for bread. They barter their treasures for food to keep themselves alive. She says, look, O Lord, and consider, for I am despised. Verse 12, is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Look around and see. Is any suffering like my suffering that was inflicted on me, that the Lord brought on me in the day of his fierce anger? Verse 20. See, O Lord, how distressed I am. I am in torment within me, and in my heart I am disturbed, for I have been most rebellious. Outside the sword bereaves, inside there is only death. Did you catch the theme of what she's saying? The first several times she speaks, she says, look, see. First she talks to God. She says, look at me, see me. And then she looks around and says, look at me, can you not see? She wants to be seen. You know, the human condition is a beautiful thing. God made us different than all the rest of creation, right? Certainly the rest of the animals in one way, like I said with art. Birds sing, but they're not composing music, okay? The only creatures that God made that are artful are humans, that we were made in his image. He also made us with a whole spectrum of emotions, from the highest highs to the lowest lows. Dare I say, culturally, we like to be on the high. We don't like to be on the low, do we? It's very hard to be on the low. I thought it was beautiful, even in your prayer this morning, Rob, there was a moment about help us to mourn fully and to see what's going on in the world and to feel them and to mourn fully with it. That's a beautiful thing. We need help with that. You know, Penny, what you were saying, it's been well over a year since Jack passed, and you're still trying to figure out how to get through it. That's part of the human condition. We don't like to go there. Some communities, some cultures are better at it than others. I would say the American culture is really bad at it. We want to be distracted. We just want to tune it out. Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe this is just me. I don't think so, but I know for me, I don't like to feel pain. I love you guys a lot, and when I come to church and you ask me about how my job search is going, it hurts. I don't want you to stop asking me, but it hurts. And I tend to want to say oh, things are great. Things are really busy. I want to highlight the good things. I don't really want to be open about how hard it is. Losing a friend, losing a family member, losing a job, these are painful, and we mourn. I mean, my last day at work was August 1st. We're well into September. I hold on to hope, and it's been busy, but it's still painful. The day that I was let go, I immediately want to focus on the next thing and get excited about it. But the truth is, I was severed from all those relationships that I had seen daily for months, years, whatever. You know what I mean? Every time you lose a job, you're not just losing income. You lose relationships. You lose routine. It's a death, And so it's hard to work through those things and to mourn and to grieve those things. I just want to move on. I didn't even tell my dad about my situation until 2 days ago. That's dumb. I mean, if anybody's going to be supportive and loving, it's your own father. But I couldn't bring myself to talk to him about it because I didn't want to disappoint him, or I didn't want to feel the depths of the pain that it is, Things are good. I shouldn't have to say this. I have a great opportunity for an interview tomorrow. It's the 4th interview in a series of interviews I've had. But still, this whole period has been painful. And I say that to say that we have to let ourselves grieve. And we have to let other people know that we want to be seen. How will anyone else be there for us if we don't let them know? We have to do that. Because if we don't do that, what happens? Grief will manifest itself in unhealthy ways. It needs to work its process, and it will. And if we're not healthy about it, it will do it in bad ways. We'll become angry, we'll become depressed, we will become withdrawn, we will hide it with addictions or distraction or whatnot, sin, whatever, pick your poison. So what happens? She says, look. And then the author, instead of being cold and third party and addressing everyone, addresses her directly. Let's look at Lamentations chapter 2, verse 13. The narrator says, "What can I say for you? With what can I compare you, O daughter of Jerusalem? To what can I liken you, that I may comfort you, O virgin daughter of Zion? Your wound is as deep as the sea. Who can heal you?" That's beautiful poetry. He says a couple things. One, he used metaphorical language. He says, I see you. and I see that your wound is as deep as the sea. Sometimes when we see mourning or grief, we don't know how to react. We might minimize it, or, I don't want to be sexist here, but if you're a guy, you might just want to provide answers. You know, like, oh, hey, have you thought about this or that and this and the other? But really, when someone is in mourning, what they need is just to be seen. You can use words like, I can't imagine how hard that is for you. I'm so sorry. That's really painful. Wow. As opposed to minimizing it or changing the subject or giving answers. He says, I see you, and I see that your wound is as deep as the sea. That's so intense. What else does he say? He had just kind of announced that her skirts, the filth was on her skirts, which is kind of like a cultural way of saying that she was an adulterer. And then when he looks at her directly, he refers to her as, O daughter of Jerusalem, what can I liken you that I may comfort you, O virgin daughter of Zion? He says, I see you. Though your sins have brought this grief on you, sometimes our grief comes because of our sins, sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, he says, even though you're getting kind of what you deserve, I see who you really are. I see you as a virgin daughter. I see you as perfect. This is how God sees us. That we can be with each other and we can believe each other and remember who we are. Before we go on to the rest, I just want to talk a little bit about a little bit of an academic discussion on this book, if that's okay. If you get completely bored, raise your hand or fall asleep. I'm a really big fan of the spiritual disciplines. One of my favorite books is called Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster. You've read that one? It's one of the few books that I've read multiple times and keep it on my bookshelf. Each chapter explores a different spiritual discipline. Fasting is a chapter in there. Meditation, study, simplicity, solitude, goes on and on. Every chapter is based on that. And when I first started becoming serious about my Christian walk, this was in the early 90s, I think I might have mentioned this before, I was fortunate enough to start a really good habit of Bible reading. The whole church was going through a commentary that was walking through the whole Bible. And so I started out my walk reading the Bible, and then I just make it part of I would call it a quiet time every day, reading some scriptures and praying. My strength has always been just reading the scriptures. And so I think a lot of years I have read the whole Bible, like the Bible in a year from start to finish. And so I'm super familiar with the Bible, like every bit of it, right? But over the last few years, I have hit a totally different depth. I have run into some tools that have helped me to learn the Bible in a much deeper way. And in retrospect, I think what has happened is I have what they say, breadth over width. I have breadth. I know the Bible's story and the narrative really well, but I would say I'm lacking in the depth of it. And that's where I've really had some influences on me over the last few years that have really helped me to take it deeper. When we talk about things like, what's the historical context? What type, is this a poem? What does that mean? There are things that I have to learn about the Bible that I hadn't learned before that have really helped me. So, to me, it's very, very challenging to really understand the Bible to the depth that we ought to if we don't understand these things. For instance, I say that this is poetry, right? Like when I say to you, red fish, blue fish, you say, well, I say one fish, two fish, you might say red fish, blue fish.
I thought it was 3 fish.
I get it backwards. Yeah, I think it's Dr. Seuss, right? He said one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish, or something like that. Like we're familiar with common poetry because it's part of our culture. But if you translate that into another language, I don't know how that would sound in Italian, but it probably wouldn't roll off the tongue like that. Jokes, metaphors, poetry, that kind of stuff. It's very hard to translate into other languages. Same thing is true here. This is ancient poetry. This is Hebrew. You're like, how in the world am I supposed to know this? How am I supposed to get the full depth of it if I don't speak that language, So we have some work to do. Here's the problem. This is my opinion. People don't know, and so therefore they don't really spend much time in it, and sometimes, God forbid, they just ignore it altogether. That's what happens with Lamentations. People are like, I don't want to speak of it because it's painful. I don't really understand it. How does it apply to me? This is a strange book. Let's just move on. So then, what becomes my foundation for my faith? Generally, it's like the religious culture that you're a part of. Dare I say that a large portion of kind of our evangelical culture that we're a part of is pretty far from a lot of the scriptures. And the only way we're going to know that is if we get into it ourselves and really learn it, and we can counter kind of what the religious culture around us is trying to promote as Jesus. It's like, a lot of it isn't Jesus. It's cultural strangeness. So I'll go with that. You can yell at me later if you disagree. One thing I wanted to say about this is, and this is the last academic thing I'll say. This book is what is known as an ACA. The letter A, letter C of the letter A. We'll talk, so the A is for alphabetic, the C is for chiastic, and the other A is for acrostic. Now we know acrostic, probably familiar with that. Sometimes someone will preach a sermon and the first letter of their points will, spell a word. Like, first point starts with a P, whatever. Then the second point starts with an R, and then an A, and then a Y. And then they'll wrap it up and say, pray, So that's a theme of that's my acrostic sermon. So the book of Lamentations is an alphabetic acrostic. If you look at each chapter, in the first chapter and the second chapter, skip the third, the fourth and the fifth, all have 22 stanzas. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Each stanza begins with a letter and it goes alphabetically through the Hebrew alphabet. So it's an alphabetic acrostic. The last thing is chiastic. A lot of the Bible is chiastic. What do I mean by chiastic? It is a chiasm, meaning that it has a pattern to it. For instance, in the book of Lamentations, you get 22 verses in chapter 1, 22 and 2, 22 and 4, 22 and 5. In the middle, chapter 3 is 66 stanzas. Each letter is represented 3 times. Aleph, 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 Bet, 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 and it goes through the rest of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's like A, B, A structure. And if you were Hebrew, receiving this at the time that it was delivered, you would be super familiar with chiasms, because the whole Bible's filled with them. And you would say, oh, there's treasure to be found in here. I can follow kind of the pattern of the chiasm. A, B, A. It's pointing me to the pinnacle, to the point. In this particular book, the point is in the middle of chapter 3. So we go morning, 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 and then something that we want to get from the whole book, and then morning, 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 and it ends on a down note. And like if you're a Western reader, you're like, well, that was a bummer. But if you're an Eastern reader, you would turn to chapter 3, and let's do that real quick. Let's read verses 20 through 40. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. For his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. I'm trying not to sing. This is the song that we just sang together. 22. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him. To the one who seeks him, it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is young. Let him sit alone in silence, for the Lord has laid it on him. Let him bury his face in the dust. There may yet be hope. Let him offer his cheek to the one who would strike him. Let him be filled with disgrace. If I am reading this, as I said, culturally, I come away from this book totally different than I think I would if I was reading it from where we are in our culture. I come away with this with the whole point of the whole book is hope. One, we have to understand grief and mourning and pain. It's part of the human condition. We have to accept it. We have to allow ourselves to accept it and to work through it. It's not wrong to give ourselves time, to give ourselves grace, to feel pain to its deepest and work through it, and also to recognize it in others. To not have to provide answers, but just to be there and say, I see you. And not only do I see you and recognize your pain, I see you as beautiful, as how God made you. And that through all of the pain, that there is hope. This book is about acknowledging grieving. It's okay that we see each other's and that we know, finally, that there is hope. And that when God sees us through the pain, that we are perfect. I hope this helps. One, to talk about how important it is to be family and to grieve together. But also how important it is, I think, for each of us to really understand the spiritual discipline of study and what it means to have our own conviction about what the scriptures say and be careful about what culture is trying to do to us, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Thank you.